Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, I am back for the holiday weekend here. Aladdin's number one. We are sort of deep into the summer movie season right now. So what I'm going to do here is a normal show, walk through the top 10 for the 3-day box office. It is a little bit weird because it's a holiday weekend. And a lot of this sort of reporting talks about the 4-day totals. I like to focus on the 3-day totals just because it's a good reference point that we can talk about performance and how they're actually doing. The 4-day totals are like, it's like, how does this compare? It's kind of tough. So I always do the 3-day weekend show. So I'll walk through the top 10 for this weekend, May 24th through the 26th. We'll talk about Aladdin, deep dive on that. We'll talk about Brightburn. We'll talk about Booksmart. Those are the 3 new wide releases this holiday weekend. And then we'll do kind of looks outside the top 10 a little bit. Then we'll talk about what's going to happen here for the next few weeks during this summer season. And things have kicked off really well here. Memorial Day weekend. Aladdin for the 3-day total is looking at 86, obviously number one at the box office, looking at $86.1 million for the weekend so far. The holiday total is looking like 107, I think. Really good performance. Let's just throw that out there immediately. There's a lot of anxiety around this movie. I don't think Disney was sure how well it was going to perform. I think in general, a lot of people were critical of the film in terms of its trailers, the look, the CGI of Will Smith, Guy Ritchie directing. Was the music going to be good? Was it too schlocky? Was it going to be a mess? And the answer is it probably is a mess, but like audiences are loving it. And so it's a really big win for Disney, and they needed one. I'm not remove the Endgame Marvel stuff. Obviously that's printing money. Like Endgame is going to make Disney, I don't know, like $500 million in pure profit. So they're not hurting, but they were hurting in terms of these live remakes and the sort of the live fantasy stuff. None of that had been doing very well for the last year or so. And so, especially when you look at like Dumbo, which is a pretty massive flop earlier this year, only a couple months ago in March, that could lose, 100 million plus. So Disney really, they wanted Aladdin to sort of right that ship, and it has. And, well over $100 million for the 4-day, in terms of how well Aladdin's going to do overall. It's tough because the critics really hated this film, but the audiences seem to love it and enjoy it. So it's hard to figure out legs from that. Let's just assume it's at about $107 million for the 4-day, but we'll use the $86 million 3-day total to kind of do a multiplier. I think baseline, you're looking at a 3x, so 258, 260 domestically it's going to get. I would say that that's probably near the basement of what this is going to do. I feel like because the audience reaction has been so, the audiences don't necessarily care what critics think. And we've seen that before with like Bohemian Rhapsody is a perfect example from last year. The critics ravaged that film. I mean, they really hated it, but audiences didn't care. Aladdin feels like it could be something similar to that. Beauty and the Beast also was not that well received from critics, but that went on to make over $500 million just domestically. I feel like Aladdin's going to be one of those where the divide is just there and audiences are going to keep going over and over again. It's also a beloved IP, also a lot of nostalgia built up. So I'm thinking 3x is probably the basement for something like this. I think it's going to go higher than that. I feel like domestically you're looking at around $300 million. I think it can hit that mark, which is a really fantastic performance. And I think, from my perspective, a little bit surprising. The negative buzz and memes about this movie were so severe and constant over the last couple of months. I had just assumed that it was going to flop. And I think a lot of people who were following this thought this $180 million production budget is going to be in trouble. Like, it's just not going to make that money back. It might break even. This is going to be well into the profitable territory pretty soon. So awesome performance. So let's take a little bit closer look at why it's performing so well. Before we do that, let's take a look at the quality of the film and just sort of see. I've already mentioned that critics hated it. Rotten Tomatoes scores a 58% from critics. A 5.8 out of 10 is the actual score. So those two actually line up. It doesn't always happen that way. 5.8 out of 10 is terrible. That's a 58% out of 100. That's what critics are giving it as an actual score. They think it sucks. They think it's a mess. They think it's all over the place. It's a Guy Ritchie film. Guy Ritchie hasn't made a good film in a very long time. His last two films were massive flops. King Arthur last year was, or I think it was last year, was I think the biggest loser of last year and a total shit show of a movie. So critics don't like Aladdin. Audiences do like it. So one thing that we're going to talk about here a little bit is Rotten Tomatoes has sort of learned the errors of their ways and decided to revamp the audience score. Previously, the audience score at Rotten Tomatoes, which I always say grain of salt because it's so easily hacked, and it's been hacked multiple times. Gotti, Last Jedi, Captain Marvel. Basically, what happens is a group of people who don't want the film to do well, just vote it down constantly, who haven't seen it. And it just became this messy, totally unreliable audience score. So what Rotten Tomatoes decided to do for this weekend, starting this weekend, is only verified audience members. Well, there's two scores. Now there's a verified audience score. And that is only people who have bought their ticket through Fandango and can prove that they've seen the film, or at least bought a ticket for the film. Those people can vote for the verified audience score. There still is the total audience score where anybody can kind of vote and say, I liked it, I hated it, this is my score. But now we have, I think, and look, is it perfect? No. Is it sort of hackable? Sure, a movie studio could buy a ton of Fandango tickets and give it a 5 out of 5 score. But it's light years better than where it was before. And I think it's going to be, I'm very glad that we have this now, because now we can sort of relate this to Cinema Score and Letterboxd Score. And we have at least 3, I think, reliable-ish data points on how the audience is responding to these films. So like we said with Aladdin, 58% critic score, 58% out of 100 actual score, which is awful. Audience verified score, the verified Rotten Tomato audience score is 93%, which seems very high to me. Actual score out of 5 stars, 5.59, almost essentially 4.6 out of 5 stars. That's very high and tells a completely different story than what the critics are saying. The all audience score, which they still do, now you don't have to buy a ticket to do this, it's a little bit lower, but it's still high, 89%, with a 4.4 out of 5 star rating. And what I like about this now is I can align it to Cinema Score. Cinema Score says A. That's in-person surveys. The night it gets released, you literally go up to a person and take a survey. You had to have seen the movie. That's an A, which is great. So I'm seeing some harmony here between that verified audience score and actually the all audience score and that Cinema Score. So audiences love this movie. What I do find interesting, though, is that my sort of go-to film nerd, film snob Letterboxd scores aren't as high. The Letterboxd score for this is 3.2 out of 5, which is significantly lower than that 4.6 from the verified Rotten Tomatoes score audience. And 3.2, but the 3.2 is actually not that out of line from the other Disney live-action remakes. Beauty and the Beast has the 3.2 on Letterboxd. These are all out of 5. Dumbo had a 2.9. Mary Poppins had a 3.4, a little bit higher. Jungle Book had a 3.4. Cinderella had a 3.2. What I find fascinating about that, and this is something that I've noticed in the reception of these films, you have, let's say, the masses. This is just the general audience in America and Canada. With these Disney movies, they tend to have a very strong and good reaction to these films. Beauty and the Beast, Jungle Book, Cinderella, even Mary Poppins and Dumbo, which didn't perform well financially, but I think people really enjoyed them, went to go see them. Dumbo a little bit less so. But they don't necessarily reach that higher echelon of, oh, this is a great film. And that opinion does not sort of blossom with any of these films. And that's where that's why Letterboxd kind of splits the middle between the critical viewpoint of Aladdin, which it's not very good, and the audience masses, which says it's amazing. Letterboxd is yeah, it's not the worst movie in the world, and it's certainly not high art. It's okay. It's pretty good. And so that's what I'm seeing with Aladdin. How is this going to affect the box office? It's tough to tell. I just don't think audiences, especially Disney fans, care at all what critics think. And so I think it's going to have a really strong run here. throughout the summer. I mean, we're almost into June now, deep into the summer movie season, so I think it's going to have some pretty good legs and do quite well. The post-track exit scores 4.5 stars out of 5. So again, right in line with that verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and Cinema Score, 70% definite recommend. Fifth best Memorial Day weekend debut, just ahead of, it's going to be ahead of X-Men Days of Future Past. So I guess they're thinking it's a little bit higher than 107, because I've been kind of like trying to check in constantly because the numbers are always changing. Oh, it's looking at over 112 now. That's my mistake. It's looking at 112.7 is the official 4-day estimate. But that's tough because they're estimating both today and tomorrow. So I don't know how accurate that's going to be, but that's sort of the ballpark. So great performance overall. Who is driving this performance? It's females. The female audience was 59 to 41% male. Normal movie is a little bit skewed male, 51 to 53%. So way over indexing on females. Over 25 was 52%. Under 25 was 48%. That's over indexing on younger folks, obviously kids, parents, stuff like that. But definitely just like teenagers in that early 20s is showing up more than they would for the average movie, which isn't that necessarily surprising for a movie like this. In terms of the demographics on Aladdin, white folks made up 42%. Normally they're about 52-ish percent, so a little bit under. Some over-indexing with the Latino audience at 27%, the African-American audience at 15%, and the Asian / other audience at 11%. Latinos usually around 22%, African-Americans usually around 12%, Asians usually around 7-ish percent. So less white people showed up and more non-white people showed up to see this, which is, it is what it is. And so, and I think Disney's very happy about that because they wanted this film to be a more diverse and open, sort of multicultural experience. And I think that's what they're getting from the audience. So I think that's a good sign for them. And a good sign, I think, for the legs too. Like, it's not zeroing in on one specific demographic. It's kind of definitely what you would call a traditional 4-quad movie. Over under 25 male female, they're all sort of showing up. The weakest demo, I think, what I was looking at was under 25 males, but I guess that makes sense for something like this, because it is Aladdin. At the end of the day, is what, it's a romance. I guess it's like a romance adventure film. I guess it is the primary driving element, romance, and that's why females are showing up. I think that's probably what it is. So that's a great performance. In terms of I think there's a lot of things to sort of pull out of this. One, the Disney live action remake sort of phenomenon, which I guess started Alice in Wonderland in 2010, so almost 9 years ago now. That did amazing. That opened up at 116, closed at 334. That was a huge surprise to a lot of people, but it's kind of been hit and miss. You had Oz the Great and Powerful that opened to 79 million, closed out at 234. Cinderella, 67 million. This is in 2015, opened to 67, closed it at 201. Not a terrible performance, but a pretty, but not like a huge, breakout. But then you had the Jungle Book. This is 2016. That opened at 103, closed it at 364. Big win for Disney in their live action remakes. The sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass, was a total shit show. Opened up at 26 in 2016. Closed out at 77. I mean, I'm just looking at these numbers now, and I totally forgot how big of a flop that was. I mean, that's an insane flop for a movie like that. And it's like, it's Disney. It's like, can be very hit and miss in terms of performance. Then, of course, you had Beauty and the Beast, which, opened at 174 back in March 2017, closed that at, $500 million just domestically. And so it is a tale of sort of like two sort of paths here. And then you had Dumbo this year, opened up at 45. It's at 112 right now. Probably not going to do much higher than that. That's a massive flop. And now we have Aladdin, open up in 86, kind of riding the ship, helping out with Guy Ritchie's career too, because remember, Guy Ritchie, had not had a film, open up over like $20 million since Sherlock Holmes Game of Shadows. So he had that Sherlock Holmes run in 2009, 2011, which combined for like almost $400 million, both of those movies together at the domestic box office. It was a really good performance for him. But then he did Man from U.N.C.L.E., which flopped back in 2015. And then he did King Arthur, which was one of the biggest flops, I think, of this decade last year in 2 years ago in 2017. So this is it's a good win for Guy Ritchie. He gets his career back, because usually I always think it's like there's like this rule of threes when it comes to flops. It's like if you flop three times in a row, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're like Robert Zemeckis or like Ron Howard or something like that. Like, you could be a legend in the industry, and if you flop 3 times in a row with a wide release, you're like done. So I think Guy Ritchie has avoided that fate here with the performance of Aladdin on Memorial Day weekend. And I think this is going to be full steam ahead now at the Disney live action reimaginings. Like, I think the big headline for me with Aladdin right now is Disney averted disaster, because going into this weekend, it felt like Aladdin was going to be a massive flop. Tracking didn't necessarily suggest that, but it just felt like the negative buzz was so severe for the last couple of months. So you just felt like, they shot this for $180 million. Like, that's a lot of cash on the line. And you think about like how much the releasing cost, you're looking at like $500 million to put this thing out worldwide on every, platform in every region. It's going to have to make a lot of cash to get that all back, and then some to get profit. And I think Disney was pretty worried that it wasn't going to happen, and they'd have another live action flop on their hands like Dumbo, which hardly even 2 months ago, like a month and a half ago, it feels like. And so, they're signing a huge sigh of relief at Disney right now for this performance. And I think it's going to do pretty well over the summer too, and it's going to have good legs. And I think it's, this is like a good lead into Lion King, which should be like $180 million. I mean, let's be honest, it's probably going to break $200 million opening weekend onto like $600 million domestically, depending on if it's amazing or not. It's probably going to be great. But this is a good first step for total world domination with Disney this year. So we'll keep tracking Aladdin next weekend. Let's keep plowing through this top 10. Number 2 this weekend, I didn't get to talk about this movie last week. John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum got $24.3 million this weekend, a pretty hefty 50% drop in its second weekend. Right now it sits at $100 million. The per theater average this weekend was $6,300. Not terrible. So this movie, the reaction to this has been great. People love it. Now John Wick is like one of the most respected and sort of successful action franchises out there now, which you just didn't think was going to happen. I never thought it was going to happen. Remember, the original opened up in 2014, October, did not do all that well, closed out at $43 million. And, but the thing about it was it just had a bad opening. People didn't really realize what it was. It had a second life there on VOD and then streaming and like probably HBO. And so it became kind of like a cult film within a year of release of like, wow, like this movie is actually amazing and like a really like pure action thriller. And Keanu Reeves is just phenomenal in it. And so I heard a lot about it on like Reddit and stuff for like the 3 months after it was released. Like people were gushing over it. So it became a little bit of a cult hit. That's why Lionsgate said, hey, let's do this again. We got really good numbers on rentals and stuff like that. So the second one opened up, 2 years ago, February 10th, 2017. Goes on to more than double what the original did at $92 million. Really great performance on that one. And here we are with the third one. The third one in its second weekend has already cruised past the second. So its financial performance is pretty stellar. I don't know how much the production budget went up on this one, but it is really crushing right now, despite the fact that it had a really tough second weekend. I don't know why it's getting hurt so bad at second weekend. It doesn't seem like the Aladdin audience is a big crossover with John Wick 3 or like a hard-boiled rated R action movie. But that might be happening. It also just might be that like screens are getting pulled a little bit. That's one of the things that like I have to look into a little bit deeper here. When Endgame came out, it became apparent that movie theaters were pulling other screen time for other movies to get more Endgame showings up. So they may say that they're playing John Wick 3, but they play it for one showing at noon. The rest of those showings then become Endgame. And so I don't see a theater count loss for John Wick, and you probably won't in the second weekend because usually the contract is the first 2 weeks. They're locked into like 3,800 theaters. But what may have happened is that Aladdin, because it was overperforming so well, started to eat up some of that screen time that John Wick was supposed to have. And so I wasn't really aware of that phenomenon until I think Endgame, where people were talking about that. I was like, oh, I guess that does happen. And I think it happened to like Brightburn and Booksmart as well, the other two wide release openers. But a really good performance with John Wick 3 here. You know, at this point, the first one was at $27 million in its 10th day of release. The second was at 58, and now we're at 100. So obviously a really a good run here for John Wick 3. We'll see what it does next weekend in terms of that drop. I think that drop's going to come way down, probably more in like the 40s, just because everybody seems to love this movie. It's got a really great reception. And then the question is, like, Keanu Reeves is getting old. Like, he's like in his, early 50s, mid 50s. That's pretty old for an action movie star. So I wonder what they're going to do. Like, they might have to pass it on in a couple of years. They're definitely going to do another one now. There's definitely going to be John Wick 4. Although I could see Keanu Reeves is one of those people who's like very set and sort of principled in his ways. And if he's like, yeah, I don't want to do a fourth, then he's literally just, they couldn't pay him enough money to do a fourth. So that might be a situation with John Wick where like this is just it, and they have to like get someone else to be John Wick. So we'll see how that goes. Number 3 this weekend was Avengers Endgame, 16.8 million, a 43% drop. Right now it is sitting at 798 domestically. That's $798 million. Let's not forget. So, you know, it's obviously, this is the record breaker. It's doing amazingly well. It's not going to hit the Star Wars Force Awakens. And I said that it was, and I was wrong. The drops are too heavy. The multiplier's not going to be high enough. It's not going to come anywhere close, I think, to hitting the Star Wars Force Awakens domestic all-time record, which is $936 million domestically. Worldwide, though, I think it does still have a very good chance of passing Avatar. Avatar is at 2.788 billion. Avengers Endgame's at 2.677. So I think it's got a good chance. The overseas performance here has just been really not necessarily surprising, but just like so strong compared, and not that the domestic market's doing poorly. It's just, it's so overperforming on the foreign markets that worldwide record looks like it's going to be taken by Avengers Endgame, while it's not even going to come close to the domestic record, which I feel is pretty interesting, because it's it was one of those movies that was super wide release globally all at the same time. And not that Star Wars wasn't, but it's like almost there's more passion for MCU outside the US than maybe inside the US on some level compared to something like Star Wars. Okay, so that was number 3. Number 4 was Pokemon Detective Pikachu, 13.3 million, 47% drop, which is okay. It's in its third weekend at 116. I can't really tell, and I have a hard time reading this film on its performance. The production budget was pretty high at $150 million. That seems way too high for a movie like this. Foreign, it's doing okay. 236 foreign. So the worldwide total for Pokemon is 352 million. Let's just do some quick math just to see where we're at on this performance. I'm just going off my deadline sort of model that I've used for a long time. $150 million production budget times 3 will get you kind of the total releasing costs for this movie, every region, every platform, all the way through basic cable. So you're looking at $450 million in costs. In order to get that in revenue, you want to have a box office that's like 1.2-ish what that is. I mean, I'll do the exact numbers here. Yeah, so you're looking at probably like $500 million, $530 million as like a break-even point. Very ballpark, folks. Don't hold me to any of that. But generally, that gives me how this is doing from a high holistic level. It's doing okay. It doesn't feel like, to me, it's going to make it to that break-even point. So it definitely feels like an underperformance. I wouldn't say necessarily a flop, but it does feel like an underperformance at that production budget level. Now, maybe they marketed it in a different way and then got down those marketing costs way low. That's always possible. But from what I'm seeing, it's not even anywhere close to hitting that break-even point. And if the worldwide box office isn't crossing over that $450 million mark, yeah, it's probably going to be a loss, which I did not expect when I was looking at the numbers for this. I thought like 116 looks pretty good. It's not. And then it ran into a brick wall, which is Aladdin. So I'm not sure how long this thing's going to stick around. So I will see, that's my read on it. Like, we'll see, like, at the end what Deadline says and what other people say in the industry about that performance. But to me, it actually seems like definitely more on the underperformance side, where it's not going to break even for Warner Brothers, which is surprising to me. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5 was Brightburn. This is a new horror movie from Sony Gem. James Gunn produced. What's the premise on this one? A kid comes from the outer space. He's supposed to be a superhero, but ends up being evil. So I guess it's kind of like a horror film. Critics did not like it. 59%, almost the same score as Aladdin. 59% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an actual score of 57 out of 100. Not great at all. Critics did not like it. Verified audience score from Rotten Tomatoes sits at 70%. Or 3.7 out of 5 stars. That's okay, not terrible, but certainly not good. The all audience score from Rotten Tomatoes is 68%, 3.65 stars out of 5. Cinema Score, they didn't even bother to measure this one. I'm not sure why. It was in a lot of screens, a lot of theaters, I should say. This is what doesn't make any sense to me. Like, Cinema Score did a score for Booksmart, which opened in 2,500 theaters. They didn't do a score for Brightburn, which opened in 2,600 theaters. How does that make any sense? I'm not sure how they're making that choice. And so critics didn't like it that much. Audiences are pretty muted on it. Letterboxd score 2.9, which is not good. Higher than Curse of La Llorona, some recent horror films, which is 2.2. Not anywhere near Us, which is 3.9 on Letterboxd. Pet Sematary 2.6. Happy Death Day 3.1. Escape Room 2.8. So it's kind of that like Escape Room, Pet Sematary, not nearly as bad as La Llorona, but not up to like an Us level horror hit. So I think the reaction here is just critics don't like it, audiences don't love it. They're kind of like whatever to it. Post-track scores pretty low, 2.5. With only 39% definite recommend. That's not a good sign. So that I think that those numbers are a little more illustrative of the legs. It's not going anywhere. Like, this will 2x, maybe 2.3x. Where would that put that? So it's at what, 7.5 million for the weekend. I don't know. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and say 2.3. You're looking at $17 million total domestically. That's not good. Budget was $6 million, but Deadline says they have a source that tells them that it was actually $12 million after the Georgia rebates. So, yeah, I don't know. This one definitely, if it was $6 million, I'd be like, okay, that's like a break-even performance. If it's up to $12 million, you added marketing, this one's probably going to be a small loss. Not a big loss, but a small loss for Sony and Sony Gem. And it does seem like, and Deadline brings this up, it seemed like the test scores on this were low. And so they basically scuttled the movie and pushed it out with not a lot of marketing. James Gunn got out there and talked about it a lot, but like, they knew that it wasn't going to be a hit. So they did not put a lot of money into the advertising budget on this one. And you can see the results here. Sony Gem's, whatever. It's not the end of the world. I didn't think it was going to do very well. Just wasn't enough buzz about it. There wasn't enough marketing about it. And I think that this performance kind of makes a lot of sense. And it's too bad. It could have been a lot bigger of a performance. I mean, a movie like this, even if I'm looking at those audience scores, they're not the worst audience scores in the world. You would want something like this to be like 13 million. I think you could get it up to. I don't see why you couldn't close out at like maybe 25, 26. This one's going to struggle to make 18. So I think it's definitely an underperformance based on what they had to work with. So that's number 5. Number 6 is Booksmart. And this one I'm going to spend some time on because this one I think is illustrative of a much bigger issue at the box office that we're seeing now. So Booksmart is kind of an indie art house coming of age film from actress Olivia Wilde. It's her directorial debut. And it has gotten just absolute raves from critics. Had a massive premiere at South by Southwest this year. Tons of buzz. Like I read about, if you read any article from the South by Southwest, the film portion of it, like Booksmart was mentioned as like an audience favorite. This movie scored in the 90s with the test audiences. So it should be a huge win, but it's not. It's flopping. So it's sitting at, for the 3-day total, 6.5 million. And that's in 2,500 theaters. Its per theater average opening weekend is $2,600. It's a pretty terrible performance. The performance is so bad that Olivia Wilde herself was on Twitter last night saying, "Hey, look, we're not doing well. Please come out and see this movie and support it." That's not the best sign in the world, right? So let's take a little bit deeper dive on this and see what's going on. Okay, so it's unlike a lot of the movies we're seeing at the box office. It's kind of an arty coming-of-age film, Lady Bird-esque. A lot of people compared it to Superbad on some level. And so there's definitely maybe even like a Juno, like back in the days, 2007 now, has that sort of feel to it, kind of a twee. But definitely an audience is there for movies like that, and that's been proven over and over again in the past. So, what happened here? Let's do the quick post-mortem. In terms of the product quality, this movie is objectively amazing. Critic score is 97% Rotten Tomatoes. 97%. That's with like 200 reviews. 83 out of 100. That's just a really, really good score. That's like a high art film score when you're hitting the 80s out of 100 from critics. Verified audience Rotten Tomatoes is 80%, so a little bit lower, a little bit slightly more muted than critics. They're not, ecstatic over it, but they do really like it. 4.1, 4.2 stars out of 5 from that verified Rotten Tomato audience. All audience score a little bit lower, 75%, 3.9 out of 5 stars. Cinema score, they did do this movie B+. So, okay, there's a little bit of discrepancy in there. Critics clearly are like, this is the top shelf film. This is going to be one of the top films of the year. Audiences are like, yeah, we really liked it, but maybe you're not like crazy in love with it like critics are. Letterboxd score is shifted more towards that critical audience. I always think of like Letterboxd as like film Twitter. It's just like film, kind of like nerds and snobs. And so they have their palette is like very specific. And this is a movie that like hits it in the sweet spot. 4.2 out of 5, which is one of the higher scores you're going to see on Letterboxd ever. Lady Bird got a 4 on Letterboxd right now. 8th Grade a 4, and those are beloved films, by the way. This is a little bit higher than those. Mid-90s, another coming-of-age film, Jonah Hill, actor turned director, 3.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Quiet Place, why do I have Quiet Place on here? That's an old one, sorry. Superbad, 3.7 out of 5, which that does kind of make me question Letterboxd a little bit. If Superbad's at a 3.7 out of 5, like, that's way too low. Superbad is like one of the best movies from that whole mid-aughts improv heavy Judd Apatow Freaks and Geeks world of comedy. Like it's at least a 4.1 out of 5 to me. To me, it's more like a 4.5 out of 5. So whatever. Okay, so the story there is, the quick takeaway is there's a lot of love for this film. Post-track scores from this weekend, 80% positive, which is very high. We already talked about the film tested through the roof in the 90s during test screenings. So what the freaking hell happened here? Why is this underperforming so much? You have a couple of reasons. One, the production studio is Annapurna. Annapurna has had a real spotty track record with releasing films like this. It's like they just don't get how to do it. The biggest mistake they made here is, why in the world would you push this out into 2,500 theaters opening weekend? That doesn't, like, if you've been following the box office for like a year, you'd be like, that's a terrible decision. Like, why would you put out this little twee movie that it's going to have amazing word of mouth? Why would you push it out opening weekend to a wide release where it's going to fail? There is no way that Booksmart was ever going to get over 4,000 per theater in 2,500 theaters, because people don't know what it is. despite the fact that there's been a lot of buzz with it, that's all film snobs, film nerds, box office nerds like myself. That's a very small group of people. And like those people sure can spread the word about the movie, but like the general audience is not going to show up because they're not in tune to that information. And so you have to have a really heavy marketing campaign. And if you don't have the money to spend, if you don't have $40 million to spend to market on this movie, or 30 million, let's say, it's probably more realistic for a movie like this. If you don't have $30 million to spend on marketing just in the domestic market in US and Canada, then you have to do a platform release. And you have to do the slow rollout. And, New York, Los Angeles, played at the ArcLight in Los Angeles, played at the Angelica in New York. See how it does. It'll probably push back. I mean, a movie like this, I would say 60K per theater, 70K per theater opening weekend, maybe even higher. Maybe it breaks the 100K mark. And then that's a whole week of stories. Oh, have you heard about this Booksmart movie from Olivia Wilde? It's doing insanely well in New York and Los Angeles, then Chicago, then Houston, then Miami. And you slowly expand it out to the point where the word of mouth is inescapable. And then you start thinking about a general audience wide release. The general audience was not ready for this movie because they didn't know it existed. It's as simple as that. And that's why it's doing $2,600 per theater in its opening weekend, which is that's a huge flop. Now, it's not financially a huge flop because they didn't probably put all that much money into this. Production budget, what, $15 million tops, maybe. Marketing wise, maybe another 15. They didn't seem like they were spending a lot of money on this. But Annapurna they blew it with this. And it sucks when you have the director going on Twitter, like begging people to see their movie. That'd be one thing if the movie was terrible. It's another thing when the movie is clearly amazing. And so this is just a complete failure on every level from Annapurna. And the question you have to ask is Annapurna going to be around in like a year? If they keep blowing it with like a given grand slam, a softball pitch down the middle, and they'd strike out, like, you got to wonder how long they're going to last, just because, Meg Allison, she's produced a lot of great movies. They've helped with co-produced a ton of amazing movies, but they're releasing through, in this case, it's United Artists releasing, but that's essentially Annapurna as well. I mean, it's like, it's a joint partnership with MGM, but it's mostly Annapurna driving all of this. They tried to do this, digital campaign, not spend a lot of money, Instagram early screenings. Ellen DeGeneres, was plugging the movie on her online profiles. None of it worked. And I'll tell you why it didn't work. It didn't work. Because at the end of the day, if you want to get people, and this is like the thing I've been hitting on this podcast over and over again recently, and especially when you're talking about smaller films that aren't comic book movies, that aren't Disney live action reimaginations or whatever you want to call them, you have to build an audience. Almost like brick by brick, person by person, you have to build an audience. And that's incredibly hard to do, but that's how they had to do it all the time 20, 30 years ago for a brand new movie that no one had any idea what it was about. And they're just, I just feel like companies just don't get it anymore. It's like the analogy I always use, to get someone to go and see Booksmart. Here's an analogy. It would be the equivalent of getting someone to go out and vote in 2020 for a candidate that they don't know anything about right now. Think of all of the times that you would have to hear about that person. Think of how many touch points there would have to be with you specifically in order to get you aware of who this person is, aware of their stances and what they are, to, how many times you have to think about how your politics relates with that person, and back and forth. And then right now this is going on in the Democratic Party of the United States. There's all these people running. And, you have to hear from them like 100 times before you can make a decision. And similar with like marketing a movie, getting someone to go out and watch a movie is like that barrier of entry. It's high. The 3 hours involved to, drive somewhere, sit in one place, deal with like the crowds, dealing with like shitty teenagers, spend $15, spend another $15 for popcorn and soda. Like, it's a pretty high barrier. The only way you're going to get people to do that is through spectacle marketing. You have to create a spectacle. And it doesn't matter if it's Endgame, and it doesn't matter if it's Booksmart, a little tiny twee coming of age film that's amazing. You have to create a spectacle to get people to show up. And like, Annapurna just completely ignored that aspect of the movie theater, or the movie industry or box office, whatever you want to call it, the exhibition business. They just ignored it. They just assumed that, oh, Olivia Wilde, people know who she is. She directed this film. It's amazing. Let's do some social media ads and people will show up. It's not going to fucking happen. Like, you really do have to create a deep and rich campaign of awareness, education, and then hooking people in and intriguing them and saying, you need to see this movie. None of that happened with Booksmart, and that's why it's failing. Okay, that's my extended rant on why Booksmart is a disaster. I'm passionate about this for one reason, because like, it frustrates me as someone who highly respects the medium and the art form, and who highly respects, artists making great art. And like, I love it when a great piece of art becomes popular and like a lot of people see it. Like, to me, that is like the biggest win of all wins. And it sucks that a movie like Booksmart, which is clearly fantastic and is a piece of high art on some level, and nobody's seeing it. Like, nobody's going out to see it. They're going to see it like whatever with Aladdin. I'm sure that it's entertaining. It's not high art. It's not a great film. Booksmart is, and no one's going to show up. And, look, maybe, it's already on Netflix internationally. It's already leaked online. There's an HD version of this movie online. Another huge mistake by Annapurna. Do not put anything on Netflix for at least 2 months after it gets released in theaters, because it'll get pirated immediately. It got pirated the moment this thing got launched at like midnight in like wherever, probably like Brazil or something. Somebody recorded it and put it online. And now I can go watch this in HD right now from the comfort of my home. Terrible decision. At least make the pirates work for it. Like, don't just give it to them on a platter. And it just sucks because, it's sad to see great art get ignored. And I think a lot of people felt the same way about this with like Blade Runner 2049. I didn't like that movie, but a lot of people, younger folks, really love that movie. And that was also, I think, depressing to see how poorly that did in relation to the quality of the film. And Booksmart, it's too bad because it's going to get lost. And like, a lot of people will discover it on streaming and VOD. And when it hits HBO in like 8 months or 7 months, they'll see it. But like, it sucks because now other studios see this and they're going to be like, the next time a coming of age film directed by a woman that is smart and has a lot of interesting things to say, they're going to say, well, what about Booksmart though? Look how Booksmart did. And then it just becomes a pattern and it gets like repeated over and over again. So in any event, okay, I'm done talking about Booksmart. Then we're not going to have to talk about it again because it's going to disappear from the box office in like a week. Maybe they can recover. It's not going to. I know how this business works. It's not going anywhere. It'll probably have a low drop though. Like, it'll probably have like a 30% drop next weekend. And maybe, just maybe, there's a glimmer of hope where if it drops 30% next weekend and people like are, talking about it nonstop, that it can sort of hold out. What it really has to do right now, and this is why Annapurna was so stupid to do it wide. The theater owners who are playing this movie, this weekend, they probably saw the Friday, Saturday numbers, and I was like, I'm not going to play this Sunday. Sure, I'll put it on one time slot, but the rest of those showings are going to Aladdin because I know I'm going to make, Aladdin did $19K per theater. Every theater owner can make more money by putting Aladdin on its Booksmart showing slots. So that's what's going to happen. And it's just, yeah. And so it might have a small glimmer of hope, but I just don't see it happening because it's going to get drowned out by these other movies. Movie theater owners are going to be like, why am I playing this at all in this mall in like Omaha when I know there's no audience for it? That's why you push it out. Even if you wanted to do a smaller release, it would have been better. Like, if you put it on like, I don't know, 50 theaters, not like a true platform release, which is like 4 theaters. Put it on 50 theaters, see how it does, and like really select. I could go in and give them a list of theaters in the United States they should play this in, and see how it does. And then that proves to other movie theater owners and stuff like, hey, like, yeah, we're going to play this. We're going to expand this out. Here's where it does well in. And it just, they just botched the whole thing. And I think it's going to disappear completely. It'll be lucky if it's still around in 3 weeks. So that's Booksmart. That's my extended rant on that. And so let's keep going. I gotta move on. Number 7 was Dog's Journey, $4 million, 49% drop. Not a great performance on this one. $15 million in the second weekend. Number 8 was The Hustle. Another United Arts releasing flop. Oh, no, actually, it's, flop. $29 million, almost $30 million in its third weekend. Not horrific, though. Good drop, though. 37% on that one. But it lost 700 theaters. So that one's kind of a loss anyways. They knew that it wasn't a good movie, so they sort of dumped it now. Intruder, Sony Gems, 2.2 million, number 9 slot, 43% drop, pretty good. $31 million so far, 32 almost. That's a good performance because, Sony Gems, tiny budget on that one. Compared to Brightburn, Brightburn's going to struggle to make 20. This one's cruising past 30, hitting 32. So that's a good performance for Intruder. Long Shot, another sort of like adult, interesting romance movie, flopping, 1.5 million, 53% drop. Total take so far in its fourth weekend is $28.6 million. Dumbo is somehow still hanging around at like 11. Why is this in the 11th spot? Dumbo's at 112 overall. Just complete disaster for that movie. How's Palms doing? The little movie that could. 70% drop this weekend. So this is what's going to happen. Like with Booksmart, I can't stop talking about Booksmart. Palms was pushed out on 2,700 theaters by SDX. Once it hits that 2-week contractual obligation, everybody's going to dump it. So that's what happened to Palms. They saw how poorly it was doing. Why would I keep this in a movie theater? It's not making me money. It just lost 1,800 theaters in a single weekend because of that. Same thing's going to happen to Booksmart. Anything else smaller wise? Tolkien, how's that doing? 4.3, not great. Told you that was going to flop. Any other? Echo in the Canyon, that's doing pretty well. 51K per theater, almost 52K per theater. Documentary about the LA music scene, Laurel Canyon, back in the mid to late 60s, early 70s. Doing well. I think that's probably just New York, Los Angeles, but I don't think it's going to expand that much. But a good performance in that platform release. But you see that will build buzz for that movie now. Like no one had any idea what it was. Now it's performing really well. You get articles about it. Now it could start to expand that and do better. It has a chance now. It was before it didn't. Okay, sorry that took so long. Let's do a quick recap of what's coming out over the next few weeks. Godzilla King of Monsters this Friday. Ma, a thriller. Ma, keep your eye on Ma. I've heard some interesting things about that. It's a thriller from Universal. Seems pretty kind of a bizarre movie. It could just be DOA, but there's something there that is intriguing. Like it could have a little bit of a breakout. We'll see. Rocket Man, the Elton John movie. Sorry, totally forgot his name. That's got good reviews, so that could be pretty good. Rated R, though. I don't know why would you rate our movie. I don't know. Whatever. So that's coming out from Paramount, 3,500 theaters. Ma's on 2,700. Godzilla, which is obviously going to be the big one, 4,100 theaters. I have no idea how Godzilla's going to do. I just couldn't even... 80 million? 90 million? 60? 70? I don't even know. I think it's in that 70 to 100 range, would be my guess. But we'll see. After that, we have the X-Men movie, Dark Phoenix, which I feels like already it's a flop. Late Night, that's a really intriguing one to watch because it kind of reminds me of a Booksmart situation, but it's Amazon. Amazon has proven themselves to be pretty decent. I think because they partner with Lionsgate usually for their distribution. They've been pretty good at rolling stuff out on platform. Big Sick a couple years back, or 4 years back, whenever that came out. Manchester by the Sea was an Amazon Studios platform release that did quite well. So they have a good handle on how to slow roll that stuff out. So we'll see how Late Night does in that sort of platform. Although they're going wide with it right away. Yikes, that could be bad news. Secret Life of Pets 2 comes out on the 7th as well. June 7th, of course. That'll be huge, I bet. The first one is just disgusting how much money it made. It was this is gross. You shouldn't be making this money for this terrible movie. But that's probably what's going to happen. Then we're going to June 14th, Men in Black International and Shaft come out, 2 big movies. The 21st, you have Anna, Child's Play, Toy Story 4, Wild Rose comes out on Neon. We'll see how that one does. Probably not very well, but man, I love these platform releases. 26th, we have Annabelle Comes Home, and the 20th, we have Yesterday, a comedy from Universal. And then you're into July, and you're looking at Spider-Man, Far From Home, and Midsummer. and a lot of other stuff coming out. This is a really old school June. This June is freaking stacked. Godzilla, Rocketman, these big movies. It's like the biggest movies. Godzilla, Dark Phoenix, Secret Life of Pets 2, Men in Black, Shaft, Toy Story 4, Annabelle Comes Home. I mean, these are pretty, Spider-Man to close out June into July. Like, it's a pretty packed summer. One that it feels like an old, like, 90s summer where just like a new big movies coming out every single weekend. Doesn't feel like we've had that for a while. That might just be my nostalgia or something. In any event, that's the show, folks. That's all I got for you. This has been the Wildland Podcast. I will be back next weekend to talk about Aladdin's second weekend, and we'll continue our Dirge DOA analysis of Booksmart and how terrible it's performing despite being an awesome movie. Anyway, folks, thanks for listening, folks. This has been the Wildland Podcast.